Today we will review OnePlus Nord. The OnePlus Nord is kind of a big deal. Or, at least, that's what OnePlus has been working hard to convey. The PR hype machine has been working overtime and the results are definitely showing. For better or worse, everybody seems to be discussing the Nord and a lot is actually riding on its success as a result. Going off of the company's own commercial message, the OnePlus Nord is intended to mark a new beginning, a bold start of a whole family of Nord devices. Another stab at the mid-range market and an attempt to break ground where the OnePlus X failed. And when the makers of the original flagship killer phone, the masters of guerrilla marketing, the proverbial underdogs from a wilder past Android realm start saying such things, people tend to listen and then expect nothing short of a market splash. It's frankly hard to think of a harder and tighter position to put one single phone in on today's cutthroat mobile scene. And the most baffling bit is that OnePlus single-handedly self-engineered the entire predicament. Sure, if anyone has the resources, market-standing production and supply chain to pull off a new Messiah phone, it has to be the mighty BBK Corporation. And in all fairness, the OnePlus Nord is a solid and well-rounded product. It's important to get that on the record right away. Specification of OnePlus Nord. Body, 158.3 by 73.3 by 8. 2 mm, 184 grams, glass front, Gorilla Glass 5, glass back, Gorilla Glass 5, plastic frame, colors, blue marble, gray onyx. Display, 6.44 inches fluid AMOLED, 1080 by 2400 px resolution, 20:9 aspect ratio, 408p 90 Hz refresh rate, HDR10+. Chipset, Qualcomm STM765 Snapdragon 765G, 7 nanometers, octa-core, 1x2. 4 GHz Cryo 475 Prime and 1x2. 2 GHz Cryo 475 Gold and 6x1. 8 GHz Cryo 475 Silver, Adreno 620. Memory, 64 GB 6 GB RAM, 128 GB 8 GB RAM, 256 GB 12 GB RAM, UFS 2.1. OS/software, Android 10, Oxygen OS 10.0. Rear camera, wide, main, 48 MP, f/1.8, 26 mm, wide, f/0. 0.8 micrometers, DAF, OIS, ultra-wide angle, 8 MP, f/2.3, 119, ultra-wide, depth, 5 MP, f/2.4, depth, macro, 2 MP, f/2.4, macro, dual LED flash, HDR, panorama. Front camera, wide, main, 32 MP, f/2.5, wide, f/8, 0.8 micrometers, ultra-wide angle, 8 MP, f/2.5, 105, ultra-wide, 1/4.0, 1.12 micrometers, HDR. Video capture, rear camera, 4K at 30 fps, 1080p at 30/60/240 fps, gyro-wise. Front camera, 4K at 30/60 fps, 1080p at 30/60 fps. Battery, 4115 mAh, fast charging 30 watts, 70% in 30 minutes. Miscellaneous, fingerprint, under display, optical, accelerometer, gyro, proximity, compass, NFC, 5G connectivity. It's just that good or even great was never going to be enough to stop this particular hype train. Now the OnePlus Nord finds itself in a rather unfortunate, even if entirely predictable situation. Ever since it has hit shelves, the reception has been universally lukewarm. A big chunk of that response has been coming off as emotional, more than anything else. You'll get none of that on the following pages, since the Nord deserves an evaluation on equal grounds, just like any other device we take a deep dive into. That being said, the Nord, or rather OnePlus, won't be getting a pass on some of its polarizing decisions in recent devices. Objective things, like the persistent absence of a telephoto camera, which still has fans harking back to the OnePlus 7T, and a broader debate on the changing nature of a value that the brand and the 2020 mobile industry, as a whole, are now offering.
Now unboxing OnePlus Nord. Presentation is vital if you are building a proper brand image. Ever since its early viral marketing days, OnePlus has been among the best in the entire Android realm at selling ideas and feeling. A lifestyle brand, if you will. At least in some sense. Hence, it comes as no surprise that the Nord has its own distinctive twist on the OnePlus look. Teal or aquamarine, depending on how much light is present, are the new accent colors. At least, going by the sturdy, two-piece box on the OnePlus Nord, as well as the accompanying welcome letter. Like we said, OnePlus knows its way around designing a lifestyle brand. The thick rubber USB Type-A to Type-C charging cable in the box is still colored in the familiar bright red. Aquamarine on the cable would have really shown some extra care and attention to detail. The 30 watts wall charger is the same as on other OnePlus phones. Cost-effective is not the worst thing to be accused of, though, especially since we can outright say OnePlus was stingy with the accessory bundle. You also get a nice and thick, frosted-look silicone case in the box, complete with a rather odd geometrical pattern on the back. The latter is probably meant to mimic a compass arrow, which is the original inspiration for the Nord name. The only notable omission, in our mind, is a USB Type-C to 3.5mm dongle, since the Nord lacks a 3.5mm jack.
Design of this phone. The OnePlus Nord offers a clean, straightforward exterior. In fact, with its flat display, classic sloping body shape and elongated, vertical main camera assembly, we would even go as far as to call its look classic. The double-wide, pill-shaped selfie camera punch hole does, admittedly, deviate from what we would consider the classic phone design. It's not really an eyesore, but it does distract from full-screen content, while also taking away quite a bit of room in the Android status bar, leading to crammed UI elements. We personally appreciate the flat Gorilla Glass 5 surface on the front of the OnePlus Nord. It doesn't introduce odd corner bends and warps in your videos and will always be the preferred way of getting more control and better handling for things like gaming. Plus, getting a good quality glass screen protector for a flat display is massively easier. That is, of course, if you feel the need for extra protection to your phone. We'll get into that a bit more in the durability section for the OnePlus Nord. On the flip side of the curved display debate, we will admit that wrapping the display edges around the frame has become the more premium look of the day. Whether subjective or not, it has allowed, in some capacity, for narrower and easier to grab handsets. For comparison, the 158.3 by 73.3 by 8.2 mm body of the OnePlus Nord is a bit wider than the OnePlus 8. Despite the fact that the latter has a bigger 6.55-inch display, compared to the Nord's 6.44-inch one. The Nord is also a bit heavier than the OnePlus 8, tipping the scale at 184 grams, 4 grams more than the company's mainstream flagship. And it is also ever so slightly thicker. The Nord somehow manages all of this despite having a smaller 4115 mAh battery, a plastic mainframe, and, like we mentioned, a smaller display. A fairer way of looking at this comparison, though, simply has the OnePlus 8 sporting a befittingly more premium and refined design and build than the mid-ranger Nord. No shame in that. Even so, the OnePlus Nord neither looks or feels cheap. In fact, it has its overall silhouette largely inspired by the ROM X50 Pro, a proper flagship offer, also stemming from the vast strengths of the BBK Electronics Corporation. We think the OnePlus Nord is making the best of said design, especially in the signature blue marble color variant. The gray onyx unit, we have for review, is considerable less fun, for the lack of a better term, but does also manage to look more serious and grounded. That distracting, colorful reflections from the back of the blue marble one we discussed in our hands-on review are not an issue with the gray on X1. We don't expect many Nord owners will be using the phone without the case, though. One reason being fingerprint magnet, that is the Gorilla Glass 5 back of the phone. And then, there is the big question of durability.
Durability of this phone. Addressing the elephant in the room straight on, the OnePlus Nord has a plastic middle frame. A fact that isn't instantly apparent while holding the phone, thanks to the excellent job OnePlus has done with the convincing silver finish on the outside rim. As far as other positive aspects go, it is worth noting that the Nord manages to weigh just 184 grams, compared to the Realme X50 Pro and its 205 grams. Despite the nearly identical design and proportions shared between the pair. Also, plastic does not dent in the same way metal does. That is not to say that you can't damage it though. On the contrary. As a certain durability torture test video already showcased, you can easily take out entire chunks of frame from the Nord, revealing a different color plastic underneath. And, of course, there is the matter of bending, which the Nord is apparently susceptible to. Particularly around the power key, which has typically been the base with bendy phones in the past. Honestly, this probably won't be a real-world concern for most. At least we would not consider it a first-tier deal-breaker. If that makes any sense. Still, prospective Nord buyers should still keep this in mind. A hard case can go a long way in providing that extra little bit of structural integrity, and you probably shouldn't carry the Nord in your jeans back pocket. We would give that advice for pretty much any modern smartphone, though. Plastic frame cost saving aside, the rest of the bill of materials on the Nord is solid. That includes the two Gorilla Glass 5 sheets, front and back. OnePlus also includes a well-applied plastic screen protector for the display. You can probably leave it on while you get used to your new phone. It will scratch up easily, though, making it a temporary additional protection layer. The metal power button and alert slider are a nice touch. Oddly enough, the volume rocker is not metal. The OnePlus Nord lacks an official ingress protection rating. Not that one would be expected at its price point. Even so, OnePlus maintains that the phone should survive the occasional accidental splash of water, if need be. We are willing to corroborate this after seeing the thick and nicely sealing rubber rim around the SIM card tray, as well as the plastic flap for the Type-C port on the included silicone case.
Controls and connectivity of OnePlus Nord. We don't typically dedicate the section to controls in most of our reviews nowadays. Mostly since there is little beyond a standard layout to discuss. For the OnePlus Nord, in particular, we still wanted to bring attention to the inclusion of an alert slider. The textured control is neatly positioned right above the power button and offers satisfying actuation. It has always been a staple of the OnePlus control scheme, and keeping it around on the Nord actually has a lot of significance. Most of all, it shows that OnePlus is still connected to its roots, in at least some capacity. We can have lengthy discussions about the current state of the smartphone market, as well as many of the more controversial decisions on the Nord. But at least the alert slider remains a mainstay. Control-wise, things that the OnePlus Nord has include a single bottom firing speaker, a single or dual nano SIM tray, and a USB 2.0 Type-C port. All on the bottom frame. Things notably missing from the mix: a stereo speaker setup, not even a hybrid one, a microSD slot, a notification LED, and a 3.5mm jack. The last one is particularly unfortunate, since there was no Type-C to 3.5mm dongle in our OnePlus Nord box. The fingerprint reader is an in-display unit of the more popular optical variety. It offers very solid performance, both in terms of accuracy and speed. In terms of connectivity, the Snapdragon 765G, with its sub-6 5G capabilities, is probably the star of the show. There is no support for Wave on the OnePlus Nord, but there are no plans for immediate US release, so that's irrelevant. OnePlus had a separate OnePlus 8 UW model for Verizon with M-Wave 5G support, so that's one way things might turn out for the Nord if it gets to US shores eventually. Currently, you can get the OnePlus Nord in either a single nano-SIM or a dual nano-SIM configuration. The dual SIM model allows 2 simultaneous LTE connections only, and 5G plus 4G standby is coming in a future OTA update. Local connectivity on the OnePlus Nord has all the basics covered, with nothing too fancy. You get dual-band Wi-Fi AC, no Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.1, with LE and aptX HD, GPS, AGPS, GLONASS, Galileo, BDS, XPS, Nav-IC, and an NFC module.
Fluid 90Hz AMOLED display of this phone. OnePlus pays a lot of attention to the choice of displays. Mid-range or not, the Nord still managed to benefit from this extra care and attention. At 6.44 inches in diagonal and lacking curved sides, the Fluid AMOLED panel on the Nord is a bit smaller and less trendy than that found in the OnePlus 8. Still, it delivers in pretty much every other important aspect. Starting with image sharpness and resolution, you get the familiar Full HD Plus, 1080 by 2400 px, 20:9 affair, typical for non-Pro OnePlus devices. Since the OnePlus Nord has a slightly smaller panel, its pixel density actually ends up being slightly higher than the OnePlus 8, at a respectable and perfectly crisp 408p. No complaints there. Thanks to OLED tech, the Nord delivers technically infinite contrast, with perfect blacks. Quantifying brightness on the OnePlus Nord is a bit hard, and that's an after effect of the advanced automatic adjustment systems, put in place by OnePlus. The Nord has 2048 levels of automatic brightness and advertises advanced awareness and smart brightness response, based on both ambient lighting conditions and currently displayed content. These automatic brightness systems, or at least a subset, continue to be active even when the auto brightness toggle is turned off in settings. We can definitely appreciate the positive aspects of such an approach. For instance, looking at a mostly white web page for a few seconds in a dark room often results in the Nord automatically lowering its brightness, even with auto brightness off. That's a justified move in practical, real-world terms, though we are not necessarily okay with the software essentially overriding the user in this way. As far as our testing procedures are concerned, we had a tough time properly setting the display to a fixed 200 nits for battery test runs. Just something worth keeping in mind. We managed to measure a maximum brightness of a rather unimpressive 323 nits on the Nord, in its default vivid color mode and with all of the auto brightness systems turned off. This is a case of the Nord being a bit too smart for its own good, as far as synthetic measurements go. You shouldn't judge it harshly based on that number. What you should note, though, is the impressive 756 nits of brightness we got out of the Nord in max auto mode, when in bright ambient light. Top stuff. The Nord screen is great to use outdoors, even in direct sunlight. Color reproduction is potentially an even more complicated affair than brightness on the Nord. You get a choice between vivid, natural, AMOLED wide gamut, sRGB and display P3 modes in the settings menu, as well as custom white point correction, with any of the latter three. The out-of-the-box vivid mode should be great for most users, delivering a nice balance between punchy OLED color science and a respectably low average delta of 5.5 and a maximum of 9.1. Natural brings down otherwise more exaggerated colors, like green, and results in a more balanced, but a bit duller average delta of 3.5 and a maximum of 5.8. That's not technically color accurate, but again, a good balance for regular users. Beyond that, in the advanced menu, you can either go with AMOLED wide gamut, which boosts most colors for an even punchier look. If color accuracy is what you are really after, there are the display P3 and sRGB profiles, clearly meant to go after the two respective color spaces. We tested them against the corresponding patterns, with good, but not perfect results. Our Nord unit just seemed to have a slightly colder profile out of the box, regardless of color mode. Thankfully, we were able to address that fully with some fiddling with the custom white point, ending up with great DCI-P3 color accuracy with an average delta of 2 and a maximum of 4.4. Calibration might not be perfect from the factory on a per-unit basis, but we still award the Nord top points in this department for both its versatility and the fact that we managed to tune it with little effort. Here are our custom white point settings, for reference. In more practical color aspects, the OnePlus Nord has HDR10 Plus certification. Its HDR reproduction is far from the best we have seen on a phone, but we can't expect more from an arranger. Widevine L1 support means that you can enjoy HDR content from the major providers in HD and high resolution. As of writing this review, certain OnePlus 8 units are experiencing software issues with Widevine certification, with some users reporting a drop to Widevine L3, without any intervention on their end. In light of that, we double-checked. As of writing this review, our OnePlus Nord unit has no such issues.
90 Hz refresh rate assessment and behavior. This phone. A 90 Hz refresh rate is kind of the expectation on a modern OnePlus phone. The Nord delivers in that respect, as well. Toggling on the 90 Hz mode in the display settings has a tangible effect on snappiness and responsiveness. Of course, high refresh rate does not make the phone run any quicker, it's just perceived smoothness. But that, alone, is enough to make the user experience more enjoyable, even boost your own speed in certain actions, like typing and swiping, purely due to the immediacy of the visual response you get. The jump from 60 Hz to 90 Hz is not as significant as going straight to 120 Hz or 144 Hz, but is noticeable and appreciated. Especially if this is the first high refresh rate display in your life. There is a lot of subtlety that goes into implementing high refresh rate on a modern Android device that often gets left out. Some manufacturers, like Samsung, opt for a very straightforward approach, with little to no auto detection and trickery behind the scenes. You get the refresh rate you set. On the opposite side of the spectrum, OnePlus is one of the companies that tend to put a lot of subtle nuances and automation in its high refresh rate implementation. The OnePlus Nord refresh rate menu has two options: -60 Hz and 90 Hz. The former is straightforward. Most every app out there and most games are already made to push 60 FPS and saturate that refresh rate. The OnePlus 90 Hz mode has some automatic smarts to it, mostly in the vein of battery efficiency. Once you turn on 90 Hz, you can expect to get 90 FPS consistently across the entire Android OS UI. That means all the menus and the app drawer. The Nord never drops its refresh rate down. This is in contrast with general app behavior. Most applications tend to support 90 FPS rendering and operate in that once launched. Here is Chrome doing just that. Wait a few seconds, however, and the Nord notices that you are not interacting with the display and quickly drops its refresh rate automatically down to 60 Hz. The Open app, naturally, follows that and starts outputting 60 FPS. The rationale behind this is that 90 Hz and correspondingly 90 FPS have the most pronounced effect to smoothness while you are operating the phone. Most content likely to be inside an on-game does not benefit from higher than 60 Hz, when not in motion. Pretty sound thinking on OnePlus' part, but it is worth noting that this automatic behavior does lead to some occasional oddities, like trying to do a UDF blue test in Chrome, seeing 90 FPS for a few seconds and then inexplicably being dropped down to 60 FPS. In practical terms, though, it's a sound decision and one that can save on battery life. Another layer of automation OnePlus seems to have in place for its refresh rate switching has to do with video playback. Most video content never really goes beyond 30 FPS, with 60 FPS already looking quite weird and seeing little actual use in practice. Either way, once a video is playing, the Nord drops down to 60 Hz mode. That's what happens when you play a clip from the Gallery app. The real interesting video logic, however, happens outside of apps that are clearly marked and known as video players. For those, OnePlus does the best it can to detect full-screen video playback and then drops down to 60 Hz. This is exactly the kind of behavior we observed in the YouTube Music app. The general UI stays at 90 FPS for the added smoothness. Only once there is a video playing and only while it is in full-screen mode does 60 Hz kick in. Netflix exhibits the exact same smart and battery-conscious behavior. 90 Hz within the UI and then 60 Hz once actually playing a video. There are certain hiccups with the automatic logic, though. For instance, unlike YouTube Music, the regular YouTube app simply launches in 60 Hz mode and never makes use of the high refresh rate. Not even for browsing the UI. Social networks tend to behave a bit odd, as well. Since it is likely that most of these rely on some sort of WebView implementation, instead of native Android components, it is a lot hard for the algorithm to do its auto video detection magic. Instead, what you get is a similar behavior to the general browser 1-90 Hz while you are scrolling and an auto drop down to 60 Hz, when you stop interacting. Since you are unlikely to be touching the display and watching a video at the same time, this works out well enough for Instagram. Most videos on there are not long enough to realistically be saving on 60 Hz for video, either. Plus, there is no real full-screen video mode to detect. Facebook is in the same boat. It does have a full-screen video player, of sorts, but the OnePlus software fails to detect it as full-screen video. Instead, you get the general behavior of 90 Hz while interacting and 60 Hz while idle. Gaming is a bit harder to properly test without a proprietary refresh rate testing setup. We can't easily hook into a game's engine and tell you exactly how many frames it is outputting like we can with rendering standard Android component, as found within other apps. Still, the couple of known high refresh rate capable games we did try, appear just to be running at 60 FPS. All things considered, we admire the extra layers of automation OnePlus has put into its high refresh rate controls. It is one of the most complicated and, in our mind, user-friendly implementations in the industry. The out-of-the-box behavior does a good job of balancing the benefits of high refresh rate and its power efficiency drawbacks in a manner that does not require average users to understand or manually intervene. We do wish that there was a bit more manual control on a per-app basis, baked into Oxygen OS for advanced users. But, before that becomes a reality, there is a nifty Auto HZ app on the Google Play Store that somewhat fills the gap. We used it to bring 90 Hz to the YouTube app, but that meant locking at 90 Hz even during video playback. There is room for improvement. Even so, currently, Auto HZ is well worth the asking price and complicated setup.
Battery life and charging on this phone. The OnePlus Nord is rocking a 4115 mAh battery. A little bit below the capacity of its OnePlus 8 sibling, but noticeably more than the OnePlus 7T. With its relatively efficient Snapdragon 765G chipset, made on a 7nm Samsung ULPP node, complete with an internal X52 5G modem, as opposed to the external solution on Qualcomm's flagship Snapdragon 865, the OnePlus Nord appeared set up for success in the battery endurance department. There is the matter of occasional 90 Hz refresh rate to consider, which we already explained in detail in the previous section. Basically, both on-screen portions of our battery test procedure, video playback and web browsing, ended up running at 60 Hz out of the box, since they involved no interaction with the display. That's simply OnePlus automatic logic kicking in and seems to be the fairest way to conduct the tests anyway, since it falls in line well with real-world usage. At least, sort of. An argument can be made that you would be constantly interacting with a web browser, forcing the Nord to stay at 90 Hz more often than not. Hence, for the sake of thoroughness, we forced 90 Hz and 90 FPS on one of our browser test runs to see just how much of a difference it can make. Turns out, really not a lot. pinning our browser to a forced 90 Hz only resulted in about 40 minutes less in browsing endurance. It seems like advancements in display tech, combined with OnePlus software and hardware optimizations and the simple fact that the jump from 60 Hz to 90 Hz is not that substantial, have resulted in negligible detrimental effects to endurance. That is only valid for the Nord and web browsing in particular, though, running the entire UI at a fixed 60 Hz instead of 90 Hz will likely get you better endurance, if you spend a lot of time browsing menus and doing productivity tasks. With semantics out of the way, we can properly praise the OnePlus Nord for delivering a solid 100 hours of endurance in our proprietary test. It manages to either match or beat the scores that we have seen thus far from other handset, rocking the Snapdragon 765 or 765G chipset and a similarly sized battery. OnePlus is making the most out of the hardware they have in this department. It is worth noting that our review unit managed to squeeze out some extra hours of standby endurance after a couple of charging cycles and following a pop-up, informing us that automatic sleep optimization has been enabled. As per the provided pop-up, having it on can cause slowdowns in certain app notifications, which makes sense. We experienced nothing along that line. Still, it is worth keeping in mind if you happen to rely on apps with particular standby behavior. Plus, extra points to Oxygen OS for bringing up the feature prompt and making the situation abundantly clear. The OnePlus Nord offers 30 watts warp charge support and so does the included wall charger. That's hardly chart-topping in a mobile realm now pushing the 100 watts wired threshold. What it is, though, is quite sensibly quick, in our book, without needlessly putting extra wear and tear on the battery in the long run. OnePlus advertises 70% charge in 30 minutes on the Nord. We didn't quite manage to replicate these results. Instead, we got around 60% in 30 minutes, reaching the 50% mark in just around 25 minutes. Prior to that, a full charge to 100% then took an hour and 5 minutes. Perfectly respectable, even if not flagship grade.
Speaker test on this phone. The OnePlus Nord only has a single bottom-firing speaker at its disposal. There is no hybrid stereo setup with the earpiece either. Just one speaker. Even so, at least some attention appears to be dedicated to audio output, as evidenced by the dedicated direct audio tuner menu. Despite the reputable name, it's not actually a true equalizer menu, but only offers what OnePlus calls scenario-based enhancement with a total of 3 presets: dynamic, default, movie and music. We tested all 3 and got consistently average loudness results every time. The movie mode does, noticeably, boost the treble, making dialogue a bit easier to hear. Music mode only manages to very slightly boost the limited range of bass frequencies, but it's only distinguishable with lab equipment. Other than that, both music and the default dynamic mode offer nearly identical frequency response behavior. And it's not particularly impressive. Highs are kept well balanced, without any unnecessary or unpleasant screeching, and that it's about as much praise as we can offer. Shame, really, since a slightly better optimized speaker output probably wouldn't have cost that much extra, especially one incorporating a hybrid setup with the earpiece. In return, the Nord would have gotten speaker output at least good enough to pair adequately with its excellent display experience. In its current state, the speaker output on the OnePlus Nord, unfortunately, drags down its impressive visual output capabilities as part of the overall multimedia consumption experience.
Oxygen OS 10.5. Oxygen OS is a core and major part of the OnePlus experience. Always has been, and especially now that the popular custom ROM has been through so many years of upgrades, iterations, polish, and most importantly, a constant user feedback loop. That's one of the things OnePlus does best. And sure, just like any software, it's not perfect, but its large loyal following in itself is indication enough of its quality. Our review unit OnePlus Nord is running Oxygen OS 10.5.2, on top of an Android 10 core. In keeping with tradition, it retains a close-to-OSP appearance, with all of the additional features carefully and unobtrusively stacked on top. Truth be told, modern Oxygen OS is a far cry from the near-vanilla experience of old. The Nord is packed to the brim with various additional features. Even so, thanks to its careful iterative approach and major focus on low-level, input and output latency optimization, OnePlus has managed to maintain what is still one of the snappiest and most responsive Android experiences in the industry. Oxygen OS is very welcoming to new users too. OnePlus Switch is the built-in data transfer tool that's compatible with other Android devices through the OnePlus Switch app or iOS devices via iCloud login that will pull the data from a backup. It's one of the more versatile migration solutions out there. First introduced with the 6T, the in-display scanner has made its way into the Nord as well and is just as quick and reliable as always. One thing worth noting is its relatively low placement on the display of the Nord. An odd reality, seeing how the OnePlus 8 Pro specifically moved the reader up a bit for better comfort. On the Nord, you do have to resort to some thumb stretching. In addition to fingerprint, you can register your face to unlock the phone, just know it won't be as secure. In any case, it works quickly and reliably. The lock screen is standard for many Android UIs. Notifications populate here and a couple of shortcuts, each for Google Assistant and the camera app can be reached by swiping from either the lower left or lower right corners. An always-on display feature has probably been the most requested upgrade in the Oxygen OS community for quite some time now. It is finally a reality, in the shape of a customizable ambient display clock. The UI also contains optional notifications, as well as contextual controls, for things like music playback. You also get to choose whether to show the ad upon picking up the phone or tapping the display. You can also enable both. By default, the app drawer is accessed by vertically swiping. You can also opt to disable the app drawer, as is more popular with Chinese Android skins. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of launcher customization options. The drawer can be set to automatically trigger the app search function, instead of just dropping you in a list of apps. The swipe down gesture, typically reserved for bringing down the notification shade and quick toggles, can also be remapped to show the proprietary Oxygen OS shade, instead. Shelf contains quick access to a toolbox, memos, a digital wallet, weather, as well as a custom app shortcut list. Apparently, however, the particular screen wasn't seeing too much, since in recent versions of Oxygen OS a traditional Google feed has taken its old spot as the leftmost pane on the home screen. At least OnePlus didn't remove it entirely. The notification shade is a standard affair. The second pull down shows a manual brightness slider. Meanwhile, quick settings available include a reading mode which reduces colors for a more comfortable reading experience, Zen mode, focus mode, screen recorder, and you can add additional ones like data saver, VPN, invert colors, bedtime mode, and live caption, which is also found in the volume menu. There are plenty of visual customization options in Oxygen OS as well, found under a dedicated settings menu. Here, you can change the look of the UI, and you can choose a light theme, illuminating light, dark theme, nuanced dark, or a semi-dark theme, vibrant tints. Dark mode is technically a theme on Oxygen OS, so there isn't a way to schedule it to come on after dark like some other UI skins. Dark mode isn't to be confused with night mode, which can be scheduled but deals with the screen's blue light filter. That is not to say that if you want dark mode, you are only limited to one of the default themes. On the contrary, you can mix and match visual elements to your heart's content and tweak different aspects of the look and feel. The tone option, in particular, has a dark mode, alongside a regular single accent color light mode and a colorful one. No colorful dark mode for now, though. If you go for a single accent color option, you can choose exactly what that color is in the corresponding menu. Some of the other customization menus allow you to change the shape of quick setting icons, and set a different icon pack if you wish. Oxygen OS offers standard compatibility with most popular packs already on the Play Store. Finally, you can set a new font as well. The default is Roboto, but you can also set it to OnePlus' own Slate font. Continuing with the customizations menu, here you can also change the wallpaper, the clock style for ambient display and the fingerprint unlocking animation. Horizon light, as seen on the OnePlus 8 Pro, is notably absent. Since there are no curved edges on the Nord's flat display to light up, OnePlus decided to skip the feature. Live Caption is a relatively new feature, now making its way to OnePlus devices and Oxygen OS. It is actually a Google feature, first introduced with Android 10 on the Google Pixel 4 Duo, that can transcribe any audio into on-screen captions without needing an internet connection. It is helpful for deaf or hard-of-hearing users since it can transcribe stories or other kinds of media where closed captions are otherwise unavailable. As of this writing, it only supports English and has its ups and downs. Music lyrics trip it up more often than not, but it consistently nails articulate speech. Here are some other notable features that are part of Oxygen OS under the Utilities menu in the settings. The first is called Quick Launch and is accessed through the fingerprint scanner. If you unlock the phone and keep holding your finger, a carousel will pop up. From here you can drag your finger to a set of customizable shortcuts or apps. Oxygen OS supports dual instances of supported apps in its Parallel Apps feature. You can use it to manage a second account on Facebook, Snapchat, WhatsApp, WeChat, or any other app that may not support multiple logins. App Locker will block selected apps from being used until you enter the phone's passcode or a fingerprint. This isn't to be confused with Hidden Space, which is a sneaky way of hiding apps in the launcher. If you play a lot of mobile games, Oxygen OS has its own game optimizer tool called Game Space. If you want to go all in on your gaming experience, Fnatic mode will block all notifications, restrict background activity, and even disable the second SIM to make sure that all resources will go to the game. Despite including most aspects of OSP, Oxygen OS still has quite a few in-house apps for basic features. Oftentimes, doubling existing Google solutions. These are typically styled consistently and play along with system-wide UI customization, which is a plus. The built-in Gallery app is versatile and offers few, but well-implemented and essential editing tools.
Synthetic benchmarks of this phone. OnePlus has a solid track record of optimizing the performance of its handsets. Through a combination of lean software and some fine-tuned low-level enhancements to things like CPU governors and schedulers, OnePlus devices have frequently ended up on top performance charts for their respective silicon. That being said, the Nord is not a flagship, with its Snapdragon 765G chipset, and we need to adjust our expectations accordingly. It has two Cryo 475 custom ARM cores at its helm, the Prime one, running at 2.4 GHz and its gold sibling reaching 2.2 GHz. Then there are six 1.8 GHz Cryo 475 silver units. On the GPU side of things, an Adreno 620. Nothing to phone home about, but perfectly adequate to deliver solid all-round performance. More than plenty for the average Android user. The Snapdragon 765G chipset is paired with plenty of RAM and storage in our review unit. We are examining the top-tier 12GB, plus 256GB one. This, in itself, could result in a small boost in some benchmark numbers. If nothing else, Bugger Flash chips tend to be a bit faster than their slower counterparts. Even so, the RAM here is LPDDR4X and the storage chips operate at UFS 2.1 speeds. It's not cutting-edge hardware, but well-suited for the class and solid enough for most users. Plus, with its small 7nm manufacturing process and integrated X52 5G modem, the Snapdragon 765G is engineered for efficiency first, rather than blazing performance. Starting with some pure CPU tests and Geekbench, we can see the OnePlus Nord holds its ground well, basically squeezing as much performance as possible from the Snapdragon 765G. For the sake of thoroughness, we also ran Geekbench with the OnePlus Fnatic mode on. Having it on does not measurably influence benchmark scores, with numbers coming in within margin of error. This is expected, since Fnatic and the OnePlus game mode are meant to ensure steady and high performance for prolonged sessions. Not to push the chipset harder for short bursts, as required by benchmarks. Moving on to more compound tests, and on 228, we once again find the OnePlus Nord making the best out of its hardware. Once again, the Vivo X50 Pro, rocking the same Snapdragon 765G chipset, manages to inch out a slight lead. However, it's a marginal one, at best, and impossible to translate in real-world performance terms. Since N22 has quite a few GPU components to its test runs, both off and on-screen ones, this is the point at which we started running our tests in both the basic 60Hz mode and the higher 90Hz one. Like we already mentioned in the display section of the review, the high refresh rate behavior on the Nord is a bit complex and not straightforward. Not all apps are guaranteed to take advantage of it in any way. N22 is one of those apps. We verified that regardless of refresh rate settings, it always ran at 60 Hz. Hence, the extremely close test results we got between the 60 Hz and 90 Hz runs. What about true GPU benchmarks then? Geekbench did, in fact, comply with the 90 Hz setting and did not bump the refresh rate down while running. However, the Adreno 620 GPU only had enough power to push a maximum of 50 FPS on screen in the lowest intensity Manhattan OpenGL S3.0 test we still run. That, in turn, makes the current refresh rate a moot point. As we ramped up the test difficulty, this trend remained consistent. We ended up getting the exact same numbers, both on-screen and off-screen, with just the occasional margin of error deviation of a single frame. These results are also about as high as we can expect from the Snapdragon 765G and its Adreno 620 GPU, meaning, once again, that the OnePlus Nord is making the most out of the hardware it has to work with. Trademark did manage to properly run at 90 Hz, as well, and with its combination of off and on-screen tests did manage to put the difference in refresh and hence, maximum potential frame rate in numbers. Not terribly practical numbers, though. The main takeaway here is that the OnePlus Nord lives up to OnePlus performance claims and manages to get the most out of its hardware. Unlike its OnePlus 8 siblings, it does not have flagship silicon at its disposal. But its number crunching potential is perfectly adequate for most users. The extra attention to smoothness and fluidity constantly being put into Oxygen OS, from the surface all the way down to the kernel optimizations, does pay off. The Nord is very snappy and responsive. A true pleasure to use.
A familiar setup, now with 4 modules. Cameras are a bit of a touchy subject on OnePlus phones, especially when it comes to the non-Pro line. Much of the tension seems to stem from the decision to abandon the telephoto camera on the OnePlus 7T and also slightly downgrade the aperture on the main 48MP one, moving to the OnePlus 8. The OnePlus Nord also partakes in this saga in its unique way, mostly by borrowing its main camera straight from the OnePlus 8. It is the same Sony IMX586, 48MP, 0.8 micrometers, f/.25, quad-Bayer sensor, behind an f/1.8 lens. Its additional perks of voice and DAF are carried over, as well. And seeing how the OnePlus Nord is cheaper than the OnePlus 8, this can technically be counted as a step in the right direction value-wise. It depends on how you look at things. On the flip side, the ultra-wide has seen a downgrade, compared to the OnePlus 8. The Nord gets a smaller 8MP, f/2.3, 119-degree unit. In comparison, both the OnePlus 8 and the OnePlus 7T got 16MP ultra-wides. That being said, The OnePlus 8 already endured all the backlash for ditching the autofocus functionality. So, all you have to live with, beyond that, on the Nord is a bit less resolution and a slightly dimmer lens. Make of that what you will. OnePlus decided to count up to 4 on the Nord. Perhaps, in part, due to mounting pressure from competitors in the cutthroat mid-ranger segment. The Nord gets a dedicated macro snapper, with a resolution of just 2 MP, alongside a 5 MP depth sensor. Both behind dim f/2.4 lenses.
OnePlus Camera App. The Oxygen OS camera app experience remains consistent and impressively full-featured on the Nord. You get every bit of software functionality from the mainstream OnePlus 8 pair with the same familiar layout too. Most of the settings are in the top right corner of the viewfinder. The app now makes it easier to shoot 48MP images without having to switch to the manual camera. There's a toggle at the top row of icons that you can use to switch between the 12MP or the full-resolution 48MP modes. Relatively new to the top row are the macro camera toggle, and a new shortcut for filters. Otherwise, the camera UI is intuitive for the most part. Swiping either direction horizontally changes the modes while swiping up shows you the drawer with all the camera modes available. You can customize which modes you want to keep outside of the drawer. Pro mode lets you shoot in RAW, 12MP, saves 2 presets, and lets you adjust all the camera settings: ISO, white balance, shutter speed, focus, and exposure compensation. Interestingly enough, in auto mode, both the ISO and white balance values can set themselves even higher than what their respective sliders allow. There's also a histogram and horizontal level, both useful for composing shots and exposure. You can also save your custom settings as a preset for extra convenience. Shooting in Pro mode only works with the main camera. Double pressing the power key fires up the camera app in a pinch. From a deep sleep, this could take as long as 3 seconds. In the most cases, it'll take just under 2 seconds. Snapping the image is quick, but there might be a slight delay if you immediately try to preview the most recent photo.
Daylight photo quality on this phone. The main 48MP camera on the Nord has become somewhat of a familiar mainstay on recent OnePlus devices. The Nord borrowed it from the OnePlus 8 and it, in turn, got it from the OnePlus 7T Pro, which lifted it from the OnePlus 7 Pro. There are certain benefits from using the same hardware over so many phone generations. You get plenty of time to refine processing, and it also provides some cost savings by reusing a proven software plus hardware combo. Indeed, the 12MP shots from the Nord have a consistent and recognizable processing. In good light, there is plenty of detail. And to OnePlus credit, color intensity seems to be dialed back a tiny bit, compared to what we saw in our OnePlus 8 review, but it's still well saturated. On the flip side, skies come out looking grainy if you are into pixel peeping. The dynamic range is quite good with the help of OnePlus local tone mapping algorithms, which work well in high contrast scenes. We didn't see any image stacking artifacts. These have been plaguing OnePlus cameras lately, with camera shake or moving objects causing blurry areas in parts of the frame. HDR is always on and works behind the scenes. The puzzling bit is that the camera settings have an option called Ultra-Shot HDR, which is turned on by default, and yet, turning it off doesn't seem to change how the photos look. Either the Ultra-Shot HDR algorithm is not triggering properly, or it is always on, regardless of the setting toggle. OnePlus has made it very easy to switch to the full 48MP resolution of the main camera with just a single tap on the main camera UI. Quad-Bayer sensors aren't meant to be used in this manner, though, and it shows in the end result. 48MP shots come out looking softer and noisier than their 12MP counterparts. They don't really offer enough extra detail to be worth it either. The Nord can technically capture 2x zoom shots. The lack of the dedicated telephoto snapper is quite apparent, though. The 12MP 2x shots are a bit too fuzzy and noisy for our taste. The quality is still serviceable if you refrain from pixel peeping, though. Hardly a surprise, when we consider that the Nord zooms in by cropping the center of its main 48MP quad-Bayer camera. The algorithm first goes through the standard binning process to get a regular 12MP photo, then crops the 2x zoom from that and upscales it to 12MP as a final step. With a resolution of 8MP, the ultra-wide snapper on the Nord is a bit of a downgrade from the usual 16MP modules OnePlus tends to use. This camera struggles to maintain both sharpness and dynamic range at the level of the main camera. Since this is a lot more common with the ultra-wides, it is a bit more forgivable, but we've also seen better ultra-wides at lower price brackets. The choice of this camera is an apparent cost-cutting decision. Ultra-wide lens correction is an option in the settings menu, on by default. We tried snapping a few shots with it off, as well. Circling back to the question of ultra-shot HDR, the option is available across the two cameras, but we still didn't see any difference in the photos by the ultra-wide. The Nord also offers a portrait mode. It even comes with two different zoom levels, 1x and 2x, and with an optional beauty filter. This is where the dedicated 5MP depth camera comes into play, and it seems to be pulling its own weight. Portrait shots come out looking very impressive, with excellent subject detection and separation. The actual image for the portraits comes from the main camera. So when you zoom in, it goes through the same binning, cropping, upscaling routine as the regular zoom mode. Hence, it's not terribly sharp. It should be noted that covering the depth sensor up does not cripple portrait mode entirely. It still manages to work, but not nearly as well, especially on non-human subjects. On the software side of things, portrait mode is light on options. There is a clear indicator, showing whether or not the algorithm has picked up the subject, which is convenient. But, you can't actually adjust the intensity of the background blur effect. Or at least, we didn't find a way to do so. We were perfectly pleased with the auto settings, though. There is a single toggle to enable beauty mode, on top of the portrait shot. You don't really get any additional options or intensity sliders here, either. The filter that gets applied is very light and barely noticeable. For what that's worth. Despite this lack of extra options to fiddle with, overall, we are quite impressed with portrait mode. It is snappy and accurate. Once a subject gets picked up, the algorithm tends to hold on to it well. And it doesn't just work on human subjects either. Speaking of non-human subjects, last and probably least, there is a 2MP dedicated, fixed-focus macro camera on the OnePlus Nord. With an aperture of f/2.4, it is rather dim, as well. Naturally, some patience, special care and attention and a few tries are necessary to get usable shots. It is possible, though. Results are serviceable. We shot our standard posters with the OnePlus Nord, at both its default 12MP binned and 48MP unbinned resolution. Here are the shots in our extensive photo compare database, for your pixel peeping pleasure.
Selfie camera quality of this phone. The Nord has a pair of selfie cameras at its disposal, a 32MP and an 8MP, both with dark f/2.5 lenses. Nothing too fancy, like autofocus, but you do still get the benefits from the bigger 1.12 micrometers pixels and wider 105-degree field of view on the secondary selfie cam. In good lighting, both snappers perform admirably. Detail is good, so is sharpness. Colors look vibrant and not overly saturated. The native 32MP output is a bit heavier to work with, due to its higher resolution. But, that's not really a proper complaint. The secondary 8MP selfie does offer a slightly more saturated palette and has noticeably more corner softness. Even so, the two are similar enough in overall look. As expected, there are beauty filters for selfies. You even get to choose between 3 intensity levels. The Nord never goes overboard, so no complaints there.
Video capture quality of this phone. The OnePlus Nord can capture video at up to 4K at 30 fps from both its main and its ultra-wide cameras. Seeing how the latter is 8MP and output stills at 3264 by 2448 pixels, we are not exactly sure how 4K video is achieved. But, the simple test of covering the corresponding sensor proves that both modules shoot video in 3840 by 2160p. At full 4K resolution, clips from the main camera look very competent, but are far from perfect. Colors look nice but could be considered a bit too saturated by some. The level of detail is excellent for the class. 4K footage from the ultra-wide has a narrow dynamic range, a noisier output and overall a lower quality. On the plus side, OnePlus has tuned the ultra-wide to output a similar looking footage color-wise. Dropping the resolution down to full HD doesn't hurt overall quality that much, which is a plus. That goes for both cameras. Shooting Zoom 2x clips is an option. These come out in full HD resolution, and look a bit soft. Interestingly enough, not particularly noisy, which would have been our first guess, but just soft across the frame. Still usable, though. Besides the regular 16:9 aspect options at 4K and full HD, the Nord also has a cinematic 4K variant. It is cinematic in the 21:9 aspect ratio sense, but not in the frame rate sense. The resulting clips have a resolution of 3840 by 1644 pixels, meaning that the Nord is simply cropping off some vertical real estate from its 4K capture. The videos, hence, have the exact same qualities as the regular, non-cropped ones. You can also use cinematic mode on the ultra-wide camera, again in 4K at 30 fps and with the same expected results. For stabilization, the main snapper on the OnePlus Nord has OIS. For some extra stability on top of that, there is super stable mode. That one always uses the ultra-wide camera as its source and crops away quite a bit of the frame. Even so, you still get a slightly wider field of view than the one from the main camera. The actual effectiveness of the stabilization itself is rather impressive. The ultra-wide camera does not have OIS, but footage from it with super stable off still looks relatively stable. Mind you, this clip is taken while sprinting. Selfie video is possible from both selfie shooters at up to 4K resolution. It is solid, even if not amazing, in terms of overall quality. Narrow dynamic range is, expectedly, the biggest limiting factor. And the ultra-wide, once again, has it a bit tougher, exhibiting extra softness, especially around the edges. There is no video stabilization for the selfie cameras. The only slightly unusual spec here is the 4K at 60 fps mode for the 32MP selfie cam. The footage is quite jittery while walking, in part due to the higher frame rate, and the field of view appears to be slightly more vertically cropped. Still, it's there if you want to use it for vlogging with a gimbal or for recording for TikTok where the phone is usually stationary. Finally, here is the OnePlus Nord in our extensive video comparison database.
Low-light camera quality of this phone. Low-light photo quality on the Nord is a bit of a mixed bag. OnePlus has had a lot of time to gradually and incrementally improve the performance of the familiar 48MP main camera since it is so prolific in its lineup. The little tweaks and improvements do add up. As a result, the OnePlus Nord has some of the best low-light photos in its class. Noise is noticeable but is not a problem. The level of detail is commendable, as well as contrast, dynamic range, and color saturation. Using the 2x mode in low light isn't as bad as you'd expect. Perhaps this is due to the already excellent low-light photo quality by the main cam. Ultra-wide cameras naturally have an even harder time in low-light conditions. That definitely rings true for the modest 8MP, f/2.3 unit on the OnePlus Nord. Noise and softness are abundant and light sources tend to clip easily. Enter Nightscape, the name of choice for the OnePlus night mode implementation. We are thoroughly pleased with how it works and the results it produces. Shots come out looking not only brighter, but with more detail and well-balanced contrast. The effect is convincing. Capturing and stacking nightscape photos is surprisingly quick too. Or rather, not as slow as we have seen on other competing solutions. And that is with the Nord's mid-range hardware. Impressive stuff. Nightscape is available on the main camera, as well as the ultra-wide. Unfortunately, there is no 2x zoom nightscape. Using it on low-light ultra-wide shots often makes the difference between a throwaway shot and a keeper. Really impressive stuff. The main camera manages to perform surprisingly well in low-light capture. The same can't be said for the ultra-wide, though, as it produces very noisy footage. Finally, on the selfie side of things, you also have the freedom to choose between both cameras. Results from both look consistently mediocre. Serviceable, but nothing to phone home about. There is an optional screen flash for extra dark environments. It seems to trigger a bit randomly, though, so we resorted to keeping it off for most of our testing.
Competition of this phone. There are plenty of Nord alternatives in the incredibly saturated mid-ranger market, regardless whether you are keen on getting 5G connectivity. Since the entire segment is all about delivering just the right value formula, it is really tough to suggest any overall better alternative to the Nord. It all depends on your personal priorities. The closest you can actually get to the Nord, while getting a quantifiably better experience in many respects, is the OnePlus 7T. The 7T offers the coveted 12MP telephoto, stereo speakers, a sturdier aluminum build, and what is a comparable or better Snapdragon 855 Plus chipset. You do have to live with certain compromises, though. Chief among which, the older hardware without 5G and slightly weaker battery. Plus, despite its age, the OnePlus 7T still sells for slightly more than the OnePlus Nord. If Oxygen OS is high up on your priorities list, you have to look at the OnePlus lineup. If, however, you are willing to concede to a simpler, but even cleaner OSP experience, the new Google Pixel 4a comes to mind. You will definitely be sacrificing on raw hardware specs, compared to the Nord, though. In some cases, quite severely, since the Pixel 4a only has a single main camera. Sadly, the more capable Pixel 4 and 4 XL are out of budget. Not to mention the fact that Google appears to be discontinuing them on many markets. Motorola deserves an honorable mention when discussing vanilla and close to vanilla Android. Both the Moto G5G Plus and the One Fusion Plus, competing in the same price segment as the Nord, come with compromises, like LCD displays. It would be short-sighted not to look at the rest of the BBK Electronics collective lineup for alternatives to the Nord 2. The Realme X3 Super Zoom stands out immediately, because of its actual periscope telephoto camera. But it is a bit older now, with its Snapdragon 855 Plus chipset, and has an LCD panel. Making the list instead, will be the Oppo Reno 3 Pro. Technically, not the latest in the Reno line, either, but arguably better value than its successors. The device turnover in Oppo's ranks has been crazy lately. In competitors' Xiaomi's ranks, we can instantly spot the Poco F2 Pro, which is an amazing value device, sporting an actual flagship Snapdragon 865 chipset. Technically, it costs about as much as the OnePlus Nord 2, but it is far from globally available and kind of hard to get. Making the list in its place, we have the Xiaomi Mi Note 10. It bumps the chipset down to a mid-range Snapdragon 730G, but its amazingly versatile camera setup more than makes up for that in the overall value calculation. Last, but not least, as a more name-brand alternative, Samsung will more than readily sell you the Galaxy A71, for right around the same price as the Nord. One UI, among other things, makes for a significantly different Android experience though. If 5G is high on your wish list, you can look at the Galaxy A51 5G instead.
The verdict of this phone. The OnePlus Nord is a solid 5G-enabled mid-range offer. One combining a well-balanced specs sheet, with the excellent, class-leading experience of Oxygen OS. Thanks to thoughtful engineering and a large infusion of familiar OnePlus DNA, the Nord manages to transcend the simple label of just another BBK Electronics rebranded device. BBK owns and ensures healthy technology sharing among its subsidiaries Oppo, Vivo, Realme and OnePlus, but after all is said and done, each company runs its own phone business in a different way. The Nord was introduced with a lot of fanfare, alongside bold promises to usher in a new beginning for the Android mid-range niche. A great PR move, on paper, but one that put the Nord under a lot of heat and with frankly unrealistic expectations. After all, it's OnePlus and you can't blame fans for extrapolating that, just like the original flagship killer, the new one should at least have a dedicated telephoto camera from the OnePlus 7T, a headphone jack, a metal frame. And that's just the more reasonable demands and complaints being tossed around and severely scrutinized. Despite OnePlus efforts to make the device stand out, the Nord is, at its core, only a mid-range device. As such, it has to play by the same market rules as everybody else in the mid-range. The 2020 smartphone scene doesn't leave a lot of room for a flagship killer, in the original OnePlus One sense. Even the mighty and vast BBK can't include true flagship specs in the Nord, while also preserving its €400 MSBR while funding a massive advertising campaign. What it can and has successfully done with the Nord, though, is to give it the proper OnePlus treatment, through and through. For many prospective buyers, that's going to be enough of an added value to choose the Nord over a slightly better spec'd, but less prominent and refined alternative.